In May of 1941, with the United States balanced precariously on the knife edge of neutrality, the Army Air Corps established the Ferry Command to transport aircraft from U.S. factories to where they would be flown to Britain. When the attack on Pearl Harbor ensured the U.S. entrance into the world conflict, the necessity to supply Allied forces around the world became a #1 priority. Transportation by rail was slow. Attacks on shipping by German and Japanese submarines was a constant threat. It became imperative to the war effort to manufacture the necessary aircraft and develop air routes that could guarantee the transport of men and equipment to foreign shores. Mounting production of fighters and bombers swelled the numbers of planes needing to be delivered from factories to their foreign destination. As a tactical weapon, planes were a liability on the ground. They required a steady source of fuel and spare parts to keep them up in the air and a menace to the enemy. Transport pilots were first recruited from the airlines and remained civilians. As the service grew, they were gradually absorbed into the military. On June 20th, 1942, the Ferry Command became the Air Transport Command. Aircraft shuttled back and forth across continents and oceans, delivering a constant stream of planes, personnel, mail, freight, and munitions. The civilian DC-3, now designated the Army C-47, was the workhorse of the early war years. Bare bones with reinforced floors, the C-47 had an extra-large door and the interior was fitted with special fittings to lash and bolt down cargo. Up to 7,000 pounds of freight could be carried by a single plane. By the war's end, larger and more powerful transport planes had been developed.
From the giant plane, a ramp is lowered mechanically so that motorized equipment of war can roll in. And at Seattle, in goes a truck. A lot of weight for a plane to carry. Also a cannon. And that's not all. A Jeep rolls aboard. Up goes the mechanical ramp, and now with that ponderous load aboard, the Boeing C-97 is ready for a test flight. It's the Army's biggest transport plane, a double-decker with a 2-story cabin. Wings spread more than 141 feet, same as the giant B-29 bomber. Length, more than 110 feet, 12 feet longer than a Super Fortress.
The volume of freight and the number of ATC depots steadily increased. In a single day, 680,000 pounds of materials could be delivered to a selected theater of operation. On the return trips, planes could be converted into air ambulances, ensuring the swift treatment of the wounded and saving thousands of lives.
To the Tunisian front come the Army's Angels of Mercy, a long way from the days when many of them served as airline hostesses back in the States. Here, within sound of the guns, they're doing one of the war's most vital jobs, the evacuation of wounded soldiers by air, caring for stretcher cases that must be sped to hospitals for complete recovery. Flying over country that would take days to travel by land, bringing smiles to weary youngsters. Hell below, but efficient ministering hands make the trip back to Blighty seem like heaven indeed.
The ATC first established 2 northern routes, from Alaska to the Aleutians, and from the east coast to Scotland via Labrador and Greenland, flying over uncharted terrain. A major mission for the ATC stationed along these bases was the search and rescue for pilots forced down into the frozen wilderness by storms and engine failure. Other ATC routes flew from Miami south into Central and South America and to North Africa. From the west coast, the ATC flew to Hawaii and over the Pacific Islands to Australia to engage in the war against Japan.
They eventually brought in enough men, rations, ammunition, artillery, and equipment to feed and protect themselves, do battle with the enemy, and build airfields. Specially designed airborne equipment, such as pint-sized bulldozers and graders, helped us lay out 6 airstrips in the Kunai Flats. Without native labor paid at local union rates, the work of building grass strips could never have been accomplished. Around Dabadura, they scraped out runways less than 16 miles from the front. Construction completed, fighter units moved in fast to protect the operation. And so the Southwest Pacific Air Forces, directed by veteran Air Leader George Kenney and Fighter Commander Ennis Whitehead, had forged a tactical weapon which helped stem the tide of Japanese aggression in the Papuan campaign.
The longest and most famous route of the ATC, the one that endured combat conditions and numerous casualties, was the flight over the Himalayan hump from India to China.
Like Chabwa, largest of the hump terminals. Here too, although there was plenty of manpower, the transfer methods were primitive. Until more ordnance equipment arrived, the natives helped fight the war with their bare hands. Some of these bombs weighed half a ton. After a year of operation by the 10th Air Force, we had grown from a squadron of 10 borrowed transports to a fleet of 140 high-altitude C-46s and 47s. By 1943, Hump Commander General Edward Alexander began to set records for troops, supplies, and equipment being lifted over the hump. Stretching before us were 500 miles of rough duty. Before it was over, the treacherous hump had cost us 250 transports, 250 cargoes, and 800 airmen. A high price to pay for the privilege to fly over the highest mountains in the world. We flew continuously, some of the time through Jap fighters and treacherous weather. The clouds made pretty pictures, but at 20,000 feet they could mean ice and death. No emergency landing fields among saw-toothed 5-mile-high peaks for us aerial truck drivers. Flying without fighter cover, it was always good to hear we were on the beam and minutes from landing at Kunming, China.
In December of 1943, the India-China wing carried slightly over 6,000 tons. Before the war's end, ATC had airlifted more than 1 million tons of supplies and 1 million troops over the hump. With the help of Army Airways communication system, flights eventually averaged 1 plane every minute and a half. Peak airlift was reached in July 1945, 71,000 tons in 1 month, including a fleet of jeeps. Every 4 tons of gasoline delivered used 3.5 tons to get them there. Despite the hazards and hardships, despite the costs, the Army Air Forces had conquered the hump.
When the war ended, the Air Transport Command had established the largest airline in the world and pioneered routes all around the globe.